and Rob McGregor welcome you to a place where all kinds of phenomena flourish. Voices whisper ancient secrets, signs and symbols are abundant. UFOs, ETs, ghosts, and even the dead move about freely. Here we meet authors, researchers, and investigators of the mysterious, the strange, and of the inexplicable anomalies that surround us. Step out of the everyday world and take a journey into the mystical underground.
Guys are ready, we'll start in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Mystical Underground. Thank you for joining us. I'm Trish McGregor.
Rob McGregor.
And our tech magician is John Posey, the disembodied voice. You can go to themysticalunderground.com where we make regular blog posts and where you can find out about our books. Among them are Phenomena, Harnessing Your Psychic Abilities, the Secrets of Spirit Communication, Sensing the Future, and Aliens in the Backyard. Our latest book is called Mind-Blowing Synchronicities, the latest science stories and research. Trish's latest novel is White Crows, and Rob's most recent novel is called Tulpas. If you're watching this on YouTube, we ask that you hit the subscribe button so that you have access to all of our episodes.
Okay. Our guest today is Keith Thompson, an author, independent journalist, former radio and TV show host, a one-time U.S. Senate staff member, and a well-known researcher and author on the UFO phenomenon. His book, Angels and Aliens, subtitled UFOs and Mythic Imagination, was a popular read in the 1990s, which I remember well. Now his latest book on the subject is called The UFO Paradox, subtitled The Celestial and Symbolic World of Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. In this book, Keith tells us that inquiring into what UFOs are requires willingness to examine who we are, the farther reaches of our nature and potentials as human beings. Welcome, Keith.
Yay!
Good morning, and it's a pleasure to be with both of you this morning.
Yeah, great. So your book is titled The UFO Paradox. In what way do you see UFOs as paradoxical?
Well, good point. The subtitle sort of touches on that, but it wouldn't be necessarily obvious. Celestial and symbolic. Celestial refers to the idea there's something seen, appears to be part of physical reality, materiality, as they say. And at the same time, there's a connection to it that evokes deep feeling. And very clearly, the paradox for me is that this is a phenomenon. The word synchronicity was just mentioned in the introduction. This is a phenomenon that spans the boundary between the objective and the subjective, and does so in a way that Western science doesn't acknowledge as possible. That's part of the challenge. That's why it's so easy to dismiss so much of the reporting. When witnesses report interactions, contacts, close encounters, the features of these are officially absurd, they're ludicrous. We know reality doesn't behave this way. I put that in quotes, of course. So it's easy for the official agents of culture in science, academia, mainstream media to say, go along, people, move on, return home. Things are fine here, nothing to see. And that has the result, I believe, of in reinforcing the symbolic dimension, sending the phenomenon underground. It's as if in many ways, I used to think that the mainstream of agents of culture, the official authorities were to be called to account for ignoring, repressing, and denying. I now think almost it's as if the phenomenon is choosing to bypass them. It doesn't need the approval of the authority figures.
Right.
No, I'm not trying to personify the phenomenon in that way.
Right.
Metaphorically speaking, it goes directly to individuals and has impact. So one of my messages is to individuals: you don't need to look to authority figures to prove this to you. It's important to live with it and see what it's calling you to be and to do.
Right.
That's why Jung called it an archetype.
Exactly.
Right. And when one of these mainstream cultural figures steps out of line and says something about UFOs that doesn't fit the mainstream view, the walls start shaking. I'm thinking of John Mack, and I think you mentioned him in your book, don't you?
Yes, I did. I knew the late John Mack of Harvard. He found out about my thinking in Angels and Aliens and contacted me. I knew who John Mack was, Pulitzer Prize winning author of a biography of Lawrence of Arabia.
Right.
Great, great man of prestige and accomplishment at Harvard, who had opened in his life to a larger frame of reference beyond the Freudian training that he had, the Freudian materialist atheist. He was not an active atheist, but he was raised in an atheist context. So his family believed that religion was, essentially superstition and that only the material world was real. And so John Mack took that on, but began to have experiences and began to explore into the paranormal, into this area. So yeah, he became a major researcher in the alien abduction phenomenon. And I recount and recall many rich conversations between the two of us. I was considerably younger than John, and yet in many ways he looked to me as an authority, as his guide into these territories. So it was an interesting inversion. Sometimes the mentor is not necessarily the older one, but I wasn't his teacher in the biggest. We were peers, and we were both individuals who feel that our accounts with reality are too easily settled. We answer too many things in a way that we're final too soon on too much. We shouldn't be final so soon on so many things. Having an exploratory approach is crucial.
I thought that Ralph Blumenthal, in his book The Believer, really captured Mack's
I was just going to mention that book.
dilemma.
Yeah. Are you familiar with that one? A recent biography on
I
Mack?
am. I am familiar with it. And the funny thing is that in the close of that book, Ralph, the author, says, John Mack may not have liked the title, The Believer, but I believe he was a believer, but not in the way that the critics would say. That John Mack believed in all this. That's why he found it. He believed that there's more. And when there is evidence that there's more, we're duty bound to follow it rather than push it away. As was the case when the Vatican, many said hundreds of decades ago, went knocking on the door, or tens of decades ago, went knocking on the door of Galileo. We understand that you are telling people that the Earth revolves around the sun.
Yeah.
According to our calculations, that's not true. He said, well, you don't have to take my word for it. You can look through my telescope. And he presented this object called a telescope. And the Vatican said, no. We won't look through your telescope. We're telling you that if you keep saying this, you'll be in house arrest. He kept saying it. He was put in house arrest. It wasn't exactly a prison sentence, but he literally was not allowed to leave home anymore. So we are still a very young species in terms of our unwillingness to open. And that's what my book is about, the open to this, even though we don't have answers to what it is.
And then it took the Catholic Church 350 years to pardon him. That tells you where they are.
Remember that character Gilda Radner played on Saturday Night Live?
Yes.
Come on, and she would Rosanna Dana.
Right.
She was editorial, and she'd get some major idea wrong. And she'd say to her, no, it wasn't the presidential election; it's the presidential election.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And then she would look to the camera, and she said, "Oh, never mind."
Right.
And so that's what the Vatican did with Galileo. In 1964, something like that. So, we're going to revisit the Galileo matter. Turned out he was right. All right. Wait a minute. Turned out he was right. What else don't we have right here?
Exactly. So you first learned about UFOs by giving a classroom report as a 6th grade student. And as a longtime researcher, how have your views changed since then when you're a child?
Well, that's how I became interested. I grew up in a family. My father was a pilot. He was a private pilot, and he flew for a living. So we were in the air a lot. So I had a father who introduced me to the wonders of the open sky but never with a sense that there was anything in the sky that didn't belong there. So I don't come at this from having my own UFO sighting, although I did have experiences of my own later that I understood were mystical experiences, were illuminations that they didn't bring me any credit per se. They weren't anything I achieved. In fact, when you have a awareness of the larger picture, it's almost more that it puts the personal self in far greater context.
Mhm.
It's not an achievement of the personal self to recognize that the self is connected to everything else. It relativizes the self. But that's a broader picture. I was 12 years old. In sixth grade, it was my turn to give a current events report in my class. I chose a UFO sighting in nearby Michigan, growing up in Northwest Ohio, a sighting that was 3 or 4 days in length. It was covered by Walter Cronkite of the CBS Evening News for several days in a row. I was transfixed by it. The fact that people were reporting things of this kind, amazing lights and objects, seeming craft. And so I planned on it for several days, collected newspaper articles. Remember those? That thing that got delivered in the driveway
Right. Yeah.
called a newspaper before we had screens. And I came to class and I told about the Air Force investigator named J. Allen Hynek, who consultant to the Air Force on UFO issues. He was he was a man of integrity, a man of science, astronomy was his background. He thought the Air Force had brought him in to genuinely evaluate these events. What he didn't know was the Air Force called him in basically to explain them all away. And so in any case, he stepped up to a microphone after spending several days at this Michigan sighting. And I told my class about this. And he said, we can't reach any conclusions about all of the elements of this, all the features of the sightings. There are many things still to be investigated, but perhaps the one sighting near the edge of town, near the swamp or the bog, maybe it was known as, that could have been, he said, it might have been due to swamp gas. And he was mortified. As soon as he used the phrase swamp gas to say possibly, could be, might be swamp gas, he watched the reporters jump up, leave the room, go out to the payphones, call the news bureaus, and say, Air Force dismisses UFOs as swamp gas.
Right.
Misunderstanding, and that captured my attention because the first time being familiar with this phenomenon, I thought I came to realize this kind of complexity is built into these UFO stories. So, long story short, my classmates said, "Well, do you think it's from outer space? Do you think it's extraterrestrials? Are they aliens?" And I said, "Well, that's what some people think. That's an interpretation some people have reached, but we don't know." And I didn't know at the time that that was really actually the right response. There's a difference between what people observe and what they interpret. And someone else said, "Well, what do you think they saw?" And I said, "I honestly don't know." And that was not a dodge. That wasn't me punting the ball in the field. It was simply, I don't know. But I did say it doesn't match swamp gas. And at that, I can still recall my teacher, a woman named Mrs. Lowry, stepping up saying the following. I think what Keith is saying is that in issues like this, in subjects like this, it's important to keep an open mind and to ask relevant questions.
Good teacher.
And a great teacher, exactly. That is the teacher that anybody wants to have at that time. It was like a benediction, a blessing for an adult to see in me the aspiring adult, potential adult who had a contribution to make, who had worked hard on this report. And then she said, "Mr. Thompson," the teachers will often do, they'll call you by your last name. "That was a very good report." She said, "You have the makings of a scientist or a reporter, or maybe even a detective." Well, I didn't choose detective or scientist. I did choose being a reporter. And again, it was like a pat on the back to keep paying attention. And so I continued to pay attention to this phenomenon and track the reports. And I would not have expected that that would be a major part of my work as an investigative journalist, but I have no regrets because it's part of reality. And it's as valid as any other subject, criminal justice, education, any other topic a journalist covers. This is just
maybe more valid.
maybe so,
Yeah.
because it really goes to the heart of things, and it
Exactly.
lot of stigma, a lot of
Yeah.
stigma. That's part of what makes it difficult. Fortunately, I have a pretty high tolerance. I have had my own experiences of reality as being larger, and so I don't come at it with the neat little boxes that we're supposed to put things in. It's so I feel free from to explore this thing and let it take me wherever the evidence leads. That's another thing my teacher said: follow the evidence wherever it leads. Wow.
Wow, that's incredible.
So
Keith,
the
you've got, go ahead, Rob.
yeah.
I got a question.
So the mention of UFOs is ignites people's emotions oftentimes. And I noticed that in your earlier book, you use UFOs in the subtitle. In your most recent book, the new one, and actually it's being released, I think Monday or Tuesday, coming right up. You use UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, instead of UFOs. Do you think that change, that shift that's been going on in the last, I don't know, 10 years or less, is something that is allowing people to look at the phenomena with a more unbiased and not and get away from that giggle factor?
Yeah, there is a giggle factor. Someone called it a laughter curtain that comes down.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I often refer to it as the UFO got an acronym upgrade.
Right.
UFO to UAP, and it was the Pentagon was sort of caught flat-footed after decades of saying there's nothing to this, it does not matter, it's not something we're paying attention to. These are all hallucinations, hoaxes, misidentifications of natural objects. There's nothing in the sky that doesn't belong there, and so forth. And yet they had a division in the Pentagon that an accomplished career military intelligence official named Lou Elizondo was exploring and covering. So they decided to call it unidentified aerial phenomena, precisely to take some of the stigma away from it. And it has now been acknowledged after decades of this being an officially non-existent topic. The phenomenon now does officially exist, but still in a marginal way. But you're correct. There's increasing freedom now. There are now procedures and channels for airplane pilots and other officials to report. You may remember the scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind at the very beginning, where a very masterful production values Spielberg put in. It's an air traffic control
All
center
right.
report, and there are three different flights. And I think one is American, one is Pan Am, and one is TWA. All three of the pilots say, control, do you see anything at my left quadrant, 36 degrees? We're catching some sight of something. So they're back and forth. Finally, the air traffic control goes back to each pilot and says, American 741, do you wish to report a UFO? Negative. And they called TWA. Negative.
Right.
And called United. No, sir, I wouldn't know what to report. We understand the air traffic. So these pilots understood that if they were to report a UFO, an unidentified flying object, it would be translated as, oh, they claim to have seen a flying saucer with aliens. That's what UFO essentially translates. When people ask me, you've written a book about UFOs. Yes. Would you believe in them? Do I believe in unidentified, that there are objects that are unidentified and that appear to be flying? Yes. Well, where do you think the aliens are from? We don't know that they're aliens in the sense that you might think that phrase means. So there's so many levels of translation that are required in talking about this.
Do you think that is that why we went from UFOs to UAPs? You think maybe so, because UAPs would be something that doesn't have the luggage that UFOs do?
That's very much it. I mean, if the Air Force and the military and the Pentagon and all of the branches are going to begin to acknowledge this, they knew that UFO had become very freighted. The term UFO was chosen actually as an attempt to neutralize those kind of associations, to say something unknown appears to be in our airspace and it appears to be an object. All of it with the qualifier appears to be, seems to be, shows up on radar, and then yet instantly disappears or breaks into balls of light, orbs of light. Right there, we have a phenomenon that appears to have materiality, physicality, but also appears to have a ghost-like presence that evokes deep mystical and psychic sentiments. By the way, one of the turning points for me in the phenomenon as a journalist, follow the evidence wherever it leads. I did not start out, quote, believing in the paranormal either. Although, I mean, except in an intuitive sense, we all find it noteworthy when the phone is ringing and we notice we've been thinking about our friend Jack from high school, haven't heard from, or maybe Jill. And I'm going to get in touch with Jill. She was always such a fun person. And you pick up the phone. She goes, "Hi, Keith. You won't remember me. You may not remember me. It's Jill from high school. You haven't had contact for 20 years." Those moments you're in the grocery store and you just have a feeling someone's looking at me. And you look up and someone is looking. It isn't that it's not a problem. You notice someone is staring. You smile, they smile. It's not the content of the exchange necessarily. It's not ominous. What's uncanny, you knew you were being stared at.
Right.
So this is the prevalence of psychic phenomena is noteworthy. But no, I did not believe in the paranormal as a field, but the paranormal dimensions of UFO cases are significant. So I have ended up taking very seriously the evidence that this has parapsychological, paranormal implications. And that's another one that's off limits for mainstream science.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's now very good
My turn.
laboratory research about the paranormal.
Okay, Trish.
Keith, you have something in here about Kenneth Arnold, about what he actually, explain that.
Yeah, well, that's an important, let's take this Arnold case. In 1947, a private pilot was flying near Mount Rainier in the state of Washington, saw 9 objects flying in formation. He was a skilled pilot. He knew what he was seeing was not ordinary, it was not normal. He was even able very quickly to compute the speed very fast, and the maneuvers they were making were very fast. And so he did all the technical specifications. He called it in to the, to the tower. So by the time he arrived in, I believe it was Pendleton, Oregon, I don't want to get that, I'm not too certain, but in any case, somewhere in Oregon, he landed, and the reporters were waiting for him on the tarmac. "What did you say you saw?" And he referred to the first confusion in the case. He said, "I saw objects that seemed to be moving the way a saucer would move if it were skipping over water." He referred to how the objects were moving. That got translated as "pilot sees flying saucers shaped like saucers." Well, it's a small distinction, but the founding myth, if you will, the creation story of UFO phenomena, the origin story, a little bit like the Genesis, Genesis is the origin story in the Bible. Well, the origin story or the creation myth of the flying saucer phenomenon is that they look like saucers, but they didn't. But even more significantly, he kept to himself certain details that, because he was associated with being the flying saucer guy in a way that he didn't appreciate, he never sought the attention that he got. It made his life rather difficult. He told his daughter privately, told his family, that the objects actually appeared to be shimmering, breathing, pulsating, living, almost like organisms that had the beat of the human heart.
Wow.
He also said that they evoked in him a sense that they came from other dimensions. His daughter said, "Dad never talked about spacecraft. He never talked about nuts and bolts." And so she said, so in another sense, the origin story of the UFO phenomenon is much closer to something we would call esoteric rather than extraterrestrial. It doesn't mean he said it isn't extraterrestrial. He never said it was extraterrestrial. There's one more detail in this. He went home that night to Boise, Idaho, landed his plane, drove to the house, and in the house there began to be orbs of light appearing. So whatever he saw in the sky that day had a connection to him. He brought it home, so to speak. So again, the psychic dimension of this is something the UFO field often prefers not to have to deal with. Hard enough to say there might be objects in the sky. That would be enough. But it appears to be more. There is this synchronicity where it cuts across the line between
Mhm.
physical and psychic. It's both at once in a way that challenges our maps of science.
Yeah, and
Well,
a friend of ours. Hang on, Trish.
okay, I have a
We
lot
got
of questions.
we got to get a button or something to take turns on who's asking a question. But I want to mention that a friend of ours who's now passed on, Jim Mosley, who is the editor of Saucer Smear for
I
about
remember Saucer Smear. I never knew Jim Mosley, but I know of him. He was
yeah,
legendary.
He was a character.
we knew him well, and he called it this whole phenomena 3.5D, 3.5 the you know
I
the
love that.
yeah, it kind of fits, and it also fit his personality of how he would describe the psychic phenomena element of UFO. But just one quick question I want to add: some of these crafts have been described as actually semi-biological, and that they may have consciousness itself, the craft itself, as well as the beings inside. Have you heard about this?
Well, I have heard that, and by the way, Kenneth Arnold said that if you want to know the shape, what I saw, they were more like stingrays,
Uh-huh.
That's
just
interesting.
moving, and they changed their densities from more dense to less dense and more transparent. So it's evocative of something far more like a living organism, and that at the same time, it may very well be that this is an intelligence that is presenting itself to our culture in a way that to make it believable. And so
Mhm.
it might assume the form of something close to our own craft, but just further beyond the framework. For example, in the late 1800s, before the Wright brothers flew their plane, before we even knew about craft called airplanes that the Wright brothers made famous and for which they are credited, there were airships seen over the Western United States that were like dirigibles. And
Mhm.
when one of them, a little man came down a rope ladder and asked for a drink of water. And the locals said, and they seemed to be humanoid, human-like, "Where are you from?" And I believe the answer is, "I'm from Kansas, but I'll be in Virginia tomorrow," which makes no sense. So there's an absurd level, to the communication that serves to signal to the agents of official culture in science, in media, in academia, there's nothing here. This is nonsense.
Mhm.
This is the villagers having their vapors. But what happens is that another villager, another poor rube, so to speak, has had contact with something that can't be explained. And so that continues to live. So it's as if something is trying to influence our mythology symbolically in a way that not only is dismissed by the agents of official culture, but bypasses them because they dismiss it. Carl
Right.
Sagan, the great astronomer, the late astronomer, famously let slip a comment back in the 70s or 80s. You remember he was famous for billions and billions of stars, how
Right.
vast the universe is. And he said, the abductions are interesting because you'd think if it was real, they would be seeking out people like me,
Oh
astronomers,
God.
men of science. Well, I remember hearing, I said, "Carl, you have no idea how revealing that comment is. There's a little bit of envy going on
A
here.
bit of
Why
ego
are they
there.
picking, well, yeah, why are they picking on Betty and Barney Hill and
Uh-huh.
Calvin Parker and Charlie Hickson down in Pascagoula?
Right.
It's precisely that they're not maybe the agents of official culture. Why don't they land on the White House lawn? Maybe that's not the effect they're trying to achieve. We ask questions that make sense to us rationally. The phenomenon comes in under our rationality and influences us at a deeper level.
Keith, do you find
Hey,
Go ahead.
real quick, because I want to talk about it. Just this is just an aside, but talking about our mythology, and actually, I'd never heard of any. Today is this day old. It's the first time I heard about I've never heard anybody report living that the craft were alive. And the reason that is interesting is that back in the late 90s, there was a TV show called Farscape. The Jim Henson Company produced it. Awesome TV show. The starship in Farscape was a living being. How, you know, and yeah, that's, so I thought that was a really unique idea, a really unique plot device, but hey, maybe they'd heard about this before I did.
Right.
You know, yeah.
The way that will work is when the debunker, and we can talk about the difference between the debunkers and genuine skeptics. The debunkers are those people who always show up, usually from so-called science. They claim to speak for science, and they just dismiss it all. They're like the Vatican knocking on the door of Galileo and saying, "We understand you've been saying the Earth orbits the sun. You've got to stop saying that because it's against the official position that we take." He said, "Again, look through my telescope and you'll see for yourself." No, we're not going to look. They put him under house arrest. So the debunkers come, and what they would say about that case is, "Oh, that was a TV series." So people began to report craft that appear like living beings. So it's the chicken and egg. Very
Oh,
often
sure.
popular culture will pick up on these images, and
Yep.
then the debunkers will claim, "Oh, people got it from TV."
Yeah, well,
like your-
I mean, it's incredible, you know. Well, I mean, like Star Trek communicators. Guess what? We have them now. You know, I mean, so sometimes, so
Yeah, but
yeah,
that happens.
But yeah, but I'm saying, yeah, it can work both ways, is what I'm trying to say. Somebody
It
hears,
can.
yeah.
It very much can. And I
Well,
want to emphasize that, just go back real quickly. A debunker is not a valid position. The debunking position, you know, Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist, who's often trotted out on these shows, he
Right.
will often, I'm actually struck by his candor. He says, I can thank you for inviting me to comment on this, he'll say to the host, maybe it's Joe Rogan. I can tell you, you know, I haven't looked deeply into this business. Well, right there, what is your qualification to speak about it? I haven't looked deeply into this business because it's so obviously absurd, but I can tell you that as an astrophysicist, such and such would not be happening, or thus and so would be happening. So we therefore know that nothing is happening. But no, I haven't given this a lot of time. Well, that would be like me showing up at an astrophysics convention and saying, "I want to be the keynote speaker. I know nothing about astrophysics. I've made a point not to familiarize myself with astrophysics, but I have some opinions off the cuff that I'd like you to devote your conference to me as your main speaker." No, I'm sorry. I don't think I would be welcome. I'd probably be shown the door.
I
And
love your term toxic skepticism. That really fits well.
There's toxic skeptic. I mean, look, I'm a skeptic. I don't take things on face value. If anyone tells me, if somebody told me that my girlfriend were cheating on me, I wouldn't take that at face value. I'd say, "Well, how do you know? How might I find out? How did you find out? Thank you for telling me. Is it maybe you want her to be your girlfriend? Or how do I know this is good information?" I would ask sensible, skeptical question, but I wouldn't rule it out of bounds because my girlfriend was away on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. She said she was away on business. Okay, I don't know. What was her business? I want to find out what her business. I wouldn't assume that it was true. I wouldn't assume it was false. I'd look to find out how I would go about confirming it. So I look at all of this. I'm a skeptic. I don't think skepticism, though, should be a separate category. When you see magazines called the Skeptical
Yeah.
Inquirer,
Mhm.
well, skepticism should be baked into all of our observations. Is what I'm seeing right now trustworthy? Are my senses giving me good information? If you have a special magazine and a special organization devoted to skepticism, you're most often going to be a haven for debunking.
But it's called the scientific method, by the way. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's what it is. The scientific method builds in skepticism. And if you have a special organization devoted to skepticism, I noticed that the Skeptical Inquirer on their website, and I welcome genuine skepticism, and I'm happy to debunk a conspiracy theory if it turns out to be false. But they say at this magazine, in this organization, we are devoted to exploring the pseudoscience of the paranormal. Now, wait a minute. The paranormal is not pseudoscience. You can take a pseudoscientific approach to it. That's what makes it pseudoscience. I can take a pseudoscientific approach to the issue of climate change.
Uh-huh.
That doesn't mean there's no climate change happening, but a lot of the claims about it in the name of science might be pseudoscience. So the idea that the paranormal is decided in advance to be nonsense or pseudoscience, it tells me this is not a source I should trust. And I don't trust someone who, if someone does a study showing that the paranormal effect of telepathy or clairvoyance is real, I'll want to look at the study and see how many subjects. But by and large, the evidence for the paranormal has actually been subjected to standards of science.
Mhm.
The scientific protocols for most paranormal research are extremely high. Double blind, triple blind, quadruple blind studies. So it's not widely perceived, but the case for the paranormal has pretty much been established. It hasn't been accepted by mainstream science.
Right.
I mean, look what's happened to poor Rupert Sheldrake. You know, I mean, he is just blasted from every side for his books, you know, and for his beliefs about the paranormal.
And he has stayed true to the idea that
He
generally
has.
it doesn't function that way. So
Yeah.
he's actually a true scientist, and he comes up with conclusions that are counterintuitive in many respects, although they're not. Do our dogs know when we're coming home? If you've ever had a dog or a cat, how's the
You
question
know, it's
is,
true.
oh, yeah, and it's sure they can hear, they have very fine hearing. There's no doubt about it. So you have to factor that in. But when you have a closed circuit camera on a dog and your car is 5 miles away
Yeah.
and you're sending energy, you're sending images to the dog, whatever effect, whatever form that you're communicating with I'm on my way home, buddy. I'll see you shortly. You see the dog running around the house,
Right.
and it's not because it hears the sounds of the car. No, that's not. So
Yeah.
anyway, what's the purpose of that kind of an experiment? It sounds quaint. Well, sometimes you have to, that's what science does. It sets up
Mhm.
experiments that control the various variables. Let me give you another example, the placebo effect. We've all seen news reports. You pick up the paper, you open the iPad and so forth, you go on your screen, and there's another placebo study. Placebo study will be on the following basis. They're testing a new pain drug. There's a control group, an experimental group.
Mhm.
What they all know in advance is everybody's going to take some kind of a pill. Well, some of the pill will be a dummy medicine, have inert substance. Some will be the actual medicine. So they all know in advance, some are going to get the real medicines and some are not. And a certain number of those who get a statistically significant number of those who get the real medicine but don't know that it's real, they have pain reduction or whatever the effect of the medicine is supposed to be. But a very large percentage of those who did not get the medicine also get the benefits of the medicine they believe they might have gotten. And to make an additional element, they get the side effects associated with the medicine, which they didn't actually get. So they
Right.
didn't take the actual medicine. So here's the fun part of those stories. They generally go, having been a journalist myself, and come up with those kind of stories, I know that the concluding voice is usually you go to a doctor, you go to a physician, and you get a quote from the physician, and they will say, oh, yes, yes, that's just the placebo effect. Just the placebo effect? It tells us that the expectation of getting medicine,
Um,
getting the possible medicine, could be sufficient to evoke the healing response. That's just merely the placebo effect. Why don't we understand? That says something about the relationship between the mental and physical that we don't acknowledge to be the case. The mind can have that kind of influence on the body. So, what's that got to do with UFOs? These are phenomena that seem to appear and disappear, cross the boundary into physicality, and evoke psychic phenomena and mystical sentiment. So, in any case, the ability to see that ordinary reality, the phone rings, it's someone you haven't heard from. I've given you that example. The staring in the grocery store, the sense of the presence of a loved one, a deceased family member, and then other family members call you that day. I've been thinking about mom again. Me too. What did you think of mom? She came to me in a dream last night. I mean, folks, this happens. And we know it happened. And we then say, well, we notice it. And we shouldn't obsess on these phenomena, but they should slowly invite us to consider that we're getting news from the universe. Hey, we live in a bigger picture than we acknowledge. That, I think, is a big part of what the UFO phenomenon is here to show us.
So what you're
Keith, you
speaking.
mentioned, wait,
Good.
please let me ask this question.
Okay, go ahead.
Keith, you mentioned 9 UFOs that Arnold saw. Is that a common number? Have you found?
No, I haven't heard anything. No, sometimes it's one, although very often they will, like I say, it shows up on radar. It shows up in with precision, consistent with a geometric the position of an object in space
Mm-hmm.
on sensors, affecting indentations on the ground, and yet will split into two craft. Sometimes the craft will descend into the ground or disappear entirely. So whatever number, so sometimes they'll separate into 9 balls of light. What appears to be a mothership craft of the Steven Spielberg variety will then just disappear or change shapes and form. It's like an astonishment mechanism that's trying to wake us up and see that there's more
Well,
going on.
Rob, remember that night we were driving to Jupiter, the town, and
Oh, okay.
saw 9 objects in the sky.
Right.
So we pulled into a clearing, and there was another guy in there going on the phone with his wife, going, "You're not gonna believe what I saw. There were 9 objects," just frantic with trying to explain to his wife what he was seeing. And we stood there for a long time, and the whole thing was so strange. I mean, we knew it was some type of phenomena, we just didn't know what.
Yeah. There were red objects, red balls of light that we saw. Yeah.
And the way they moved was just
right.
Weird.
So I think Trish brings up the number question. Then this can move also into the and you're speaking of the phenomena, psychic phenomena matter. It also leads us to the abduction phenomena, where 3 aliens are often involved in these cases. So over and over, they abductees. I don't know if it's a requirement, but oftentimes they see 3 beings. And but this is another phenomena where the skeptics go crazy about because it's very difficult to find physical evidence that these abductions took place. Yet there's so many people all over the world telling these same stories. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, there are with the abductions, which appear to have sort of dissipated now.
Yeah,
I don't know what's going on with that. It's partly maybe that the main researchers, Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs and John Mack, are all off the scene now. David Jacobs is still alive, but he's retired. So it's a question of, is there not a researcher to cover it? But yeah, the physical phenomena of abductions, the scoop marks on people's bodies, the implants. Now, those who may not know about that, I'm not arguing for on either side, but just the reports of, there's one particular report, a man named Terry Lovelace, who is a former attorney general of one of the states. I don't remember which one. He had a problem with his knee. He went to the doctor and said, "What's going on?" The doctor said, "Well, I've done the x-rays. When did you have that surgery in your knee and the hardware implanted?" "What is that hardware?" "I don't have any hardware." "Yes, you do. You've got hardware in your body." Now, it is almost beyond comprehension what Terry Lovelace recalled, that he and a friend were on a camping trip. A craft descended. They were both taken inside. They both had medical experiments, surgical implants. Okay. The evidence for the quality of witness testimony on this is very good. In this case, and it's not this case alone, the physical object was identified. Was it a transmission mechanism, a device? I don't know. I can't claim that I have any physical evidence of the implants being real, but this is a very good example of an aspect of the physicality of this that remains. It's like fugitive physicality, elusive physicality. It's there, but it can't be proven beyond the shadow of a doubt. So it is as if a phenomenon is trying to implant in us images of implants. Images of implants are implanted. The case is not proved definitively. But
well, for Whitley Strieber, it is.
Well,
He,
with Whitley Strieber it is. And I once referred in a talk, he was in the room. I said, the alleged implants are interesting. He said, what do you mean alleged?
yeah. Yeah, he told us about that, how it affects his vision. It's bizarre, you
Oh
know.
yeah, he's become a friend, and we've talk about these things all the time. And he's an example. You know, people will often say to me, Keith, you have been tracking this for a long time. I've described to you the experience I've had. Should I go public with it? And I thought, well, I'm glad that you've turned to me. I'm glad that you feel I might have some credibility for you. My advice to you, based on what I have learned, tell someone. Tell someone in your life that you love. If you have a minister, a counselor, a
Mhm.
family friend who that you can trust each other with your BS detectors and all that, trust somebody that you know who will hear you out and won't mock you or be skeptical in the toxic sense.
Uh,
But no, don't hold a news conference. Don't go on the local TV or radio show
don't write a
unless you
book.
don't write a book unless you're prepared. I'm
Yeah.
saying in the wake of your mention of Whitley Strieber, he wrote a book called Communion, professional writer that he knew how to write. Of course, the debunkers said, "Oh, well, he'd written horror novels."
Right, right.
His career had reached a low point. He decided to invent a story. Of all the hypotheses about Whitley Strieber's case, the idea that this man invented this from whole
No.
cloth is very close to the bottom of the possibilities. But so I would recommend to people, yeah, don't live with this bottled up. Whether it's an abduction, a psychic experience, a transformative peak experience, a sense of that you've lost the definition, the boundary between
Mm,
yourself and the rest of the universe, which is what a mystical experience comes down to, a sense of what are the boundaries. That's a powerful question.
yeah.
And it's important to maybe not take that to church with you and ask everybody in the congregation, because many people are afraid of the UFO. This phenomenon, the stigma is such that we are still a very tribal species.
Hmm.
And we don't like to have news from the universe that upsets our certainty.
Well, that may be why a lot of people shy away from psychic phenomena, period. It's ooh, it's too woo-woo.
Yeah, and I have a chapter in the book called Who Do We Think We Are?
Yeah.
And the reason I chose that chapter because I use that chapter to delineate case after case of extraordinary human functioning
Hmm.
that transcends what we know to be, what we believe we know to be the limits of human potential. And I think we are afraid of the idea that we might
Uh,
have psychic capacities. Is my private life still private if you might be able to see it, and so forth. So but like any capacity, it requires living into it with intelligence and wisdom and with emotional intelligence. The phenomenon will not go away. What I often say about this is that whenever you have a consistent body of data, whether it's for UFO reports, their near-death experience, psychic phenomena in general, and you find that the territories that are described in these experiences don't make it onto the maps of science,
hmm.
at some point the the issue becomes, has anybody checked the maps lately? Maybe the maps are outdated. Yes, this isn't yet on the maps of society and science as real, but that's not because the territories aren't real. It's
Hmm.
because we haven't found a way. For example, many mainstream scientists will admit, most of them only privately, they'll say, I'm convinced by the research. There's really a signal here. There's something going on with the paranormal. Well, then are you willing to talk about this with your colleagues?
Oh.
Well, not yet, because we don't know the mechanism. We don't know how it works. How is this information transferred? But you believe it is transferred. Yes, we just don't know how. So that's the final sticking point for many otherwise open-minded scientists. They'll say, if I can't explain the mechanism, well, we don't know what the mechanism of acupuncture is
Right.
either. We don't know that there are 7 energy centers in the body called chakras, but in the esoteric anatomies, there are 7 or 9 energy centers called chakras. It seems to correlate with the idea that there are, quote, meridians in the body, but at the minimum, apart from all that, we know that acupuncture does work, but we don't understand the mechanism according to
Uh-huh.
physical science. So maybe we need an energy model in order to understand these larger phenomena in
Mhm.
some cases.
So Keith, What about the government's involvement in UFOs and research and the repeated calls for disclosure, what they know? And do you think there's any one secret organization within the government that is holding on to this information, or is it divided among many different parts of the government and they're all competing with this? And will they ever release the information?
Those are all questions that are great, and we kind of tease them apart. It does appear that there is a lot of compartmentalized secrecy about this subject, to say the least. Now, there's another conclusion that gets reached that I just don't go to until the evidence says so. That is what the government knows, rather than that the government knows something that they're not revealing. I had the opportunity to work with the late Lawrence Rockefeller, who contacted me after I published my book, Angels and Aliens, and said he wanted me to join a bunch of other researchers he was drawing together at his ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Would I be able to make it? I said, well, I'll check my schedule, but I think I might be able to. It was an honor and a privilege, and we developed a great relationship. And the goal that we decided on, this group of researchers that included John Mack and some others, was to seek the release of information on one case in particular. The decision was made, let's go with Roswell, since that has been such a controversial subject. An inquiry was made to the Clinton White House and to the science advisor, back and forth. It appeared to be on the up and up, and the report came back to the Clinton White House from the sources in the know. There's no evidence that there was any spacecraft. In other words, it confirmed if there's a cover-up of Roswell, the cover-up was confirmed the response that there's nothing here. But nevertheless, what's interesting about that is that within that same time period, it was also discovered that 5 years of communications, records, files related to Roswell were deleted. At the very time the Rockefeller Initiative went forward seeking the information. That doesn't prove that it was extraterrestrials that were covered up, but something crashed in Roswell. It was either something of ours, something from the Soviet Union. There's actually a pretty good theory that that might have been something that came through the Soviet Union, through the Bering Straits of Alaska, ended up in, and the idea that that would have crossed that would have been able to have happened would need to be contained, right? We'd need to keep that secret. Or it could have been extraterrestrial, but something crashed. It left a wide range of debris. The military went door to door telling people, if you have gathered any of this material and we find out, you're going to be in real trouble. So people delivered the debris, which appeared to be foil-like, and so there were many features of it. I don't know what happened at Roswell. See, that's one of the cases that I've come to believe is almost like a rabbit hole that's too deep. But to get to your larger question, is the government withholding? Yes. What are they withholding? I actually think in most cases, the features of this phenomenon, the rates of speed, the trajectory, the right angle turns, the ability to appear and disappear from radar, from common sight, the ability of the phenomenon to go hundreds of miles in 2 seconds. I think what the military is very likely holding back is they don't know what's going on. It is their job to know what is going on. They cannot give a news conference describing these features and then saying, we don't know what it is, but we'll keep you posted. We can't expect to hear that. They're not going to say they're not in control. So they say there's nothing going on. And
what about a place like Skinwalker Ranch? I mean, that's plenty weird, you know.
It's plenty weird. And the funny thing about Skinwalker, when I was doing this book, I actually sought permission from the owner of Skinwalker Ranch. Could I come and cover this? And I never heard back. In fact, I think
really,
yeah, they had, I think, pretty much decided there were too many journalists who were seeking it out.
Right.
And at one point they had a release form that you had to sign that was several pages long because of the potential for injury. I don't know if all our viewers and listeners know what Skinwalker Ranch is. It's a ranch in Utah. The TV show that is on one of the cable channels that covers the secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. It is a paranormal hotspot. I haven't been there myself. but I'm ultimately glad I didn't get invited, because there are cases where people make contact with these orbs of light that
Right.
result in physical injury. And I thought, I don't need to have an experience that I can't end up even confirming. That may not be solid proof, but if
Uh-huh.
I end up with an injury, I don't think so. No, I think I'm going to pass. So
Was
I
this when
don't.
Bigelow owned it that you
It was
requested?
after Bigelow owned it. And I talked with Robert Bigelow. I've only had one conversation with him, and you know about the hitchhiker effect.
Uh-huh.
This is people who go to Skinwalker Ranch and then fly back home to Arlington, Virginia, and then have paranormal phenomena in their homes,
Hmm.
with the children in the home who don't even know that the father had been to a place like
Right.
Skinwalker, because the father works in deep intelligence. All the family knows is dad does stuff that he doesn't talk with us about. And so dad came home from Skinwalker Ranch. Mom and the kids didn't know where he was. They don't know where he is most of the time, because that's the nature of his job, highly classified. But orbs of light and creatures began to appear in the backyard. I know that the debunker mentality is very big on this. They go, "Oh yes, the monsters of Skinwalker
Uh-huh.
Ranch. You believe it, do you?" It's again the question of belief. It's an attempt uh, to marginalize. But no, so I asked Robert Bigelow, would you think it would be advisable for me to go as a journalist who's wanting to cover this? He
Mm.
said, Keith, all I can tell you is don't go unless you're willing to have something come home with you.
Hmm.
Oh, wow.
He was
Interesting.
referring to
Interesting.
and it happened for him. He said in his case, the phenomena that showed up in his house for a while was noticeable. Phantoms, lights,
Huh.
other, but it was not toxic. It was not dangerous to his
Hmm.
health. And as it began to clear away, it disappeared. By the way, there's a pretty good body of evidence that those who come onto Skinwalker Ranch with a hardcore skeptical attitude, with the military people tend to have the darkest
Uh-huh.
experiences. So that might be because the military people come with the most skeptical or the most critical, negative assumptions. Whereas those who come onto Skinwalker Ranch with some sense of respect, I mean, it appears to be related to the Native American prophecies in
Hmm.
that area. So if
Right.
that's the case, if there is a curse, quote unquote, then first of all, that's a good reason to question, do I want to go to a cursed land as a journalist? But
Yep.
second, if you do go, you'd kind of put the palms of your hands together and ask permission and show respect for any kind of a phenomenon like that. I know that seems ludicrous to some, but when you look, I didn't start out open to these larger questions, but again, follow the evidence wherever it leads, and
Yeah,
that's
certainly the University of Alabama astrophysicist who got involved was very skeptical when he entered, and now he's completely shifted his view from the experience that he's had and
Uh,
others have had. And what I find hilarious is they keep shooting rockets up in the air.
Yeah, they love their rockets.
Uh, and and they have all these gear, all the equipment, that they're recording things, which it's like the far side from the of a psychic being there picking up things. They're using very analytical equipment to describe what the experience are, and they're always talking about this number that comes up 3.1 or something.
Or 6.1, I think it is
Yeah, yeah. So
megahertz or
yeah,
something.
right. It's interesting. I don't always understand the scientific aspect of it with the equipment, but it's interesting how they see
re-
that as being very important.
real quick, Rob, I have to correct you. University of Alabama in Huntsville.
Okay.
I'll, that I'm a modest, so yeah, not Tuscaloosa, Huntsville, but go ahead.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Let's just go into the question related to the government again. Captured spacecraft. There's been a couple of people who have spoken out about this related to Area 51 or something called S4, by a guy named Bob Laser, and then most recently an Air Force former Air Force officer named David Gresh has spoken about these crafts. I think Laser said there were 9 of them that they had captured. Have you looked into this part of it?
I have. It's actually Lazar, pronounced Lazar, Bob Lazar.
Okay. Yeah.
I have not. I did not go deeply into the Bob Lazar case because it's another one that's almost. There are. The more deeply you go into it, the
Yeah.
more
The personality part.
Yeah, and there are aspects of his credibility that are enhanced, and aspects that are not. I mean, you take any human life and you examine it with a fine-tooth comb, you're going to find yeah, a lifetime of complex factors. So David Grush is a former Air Force official who has conducted a lot of research and has concluded that he's turned into the Inspector General of the intelligence community a list of names, dates, locations of alleged recovered craft and biologics. He uses the term biologic. He hasn't seen it himself, but he's talked to people who have claimed to have either worked with the material themselves, etc. The idea is that it has been offloaded from the government to the aerospace corporations, which is a pretty interesting and slippery boundary, right? I mean, these corporations get contracts that allow them to have privileged access to apparent retrievals of that kind. What have they retrieved? If they've retrieved anything, it's open for question. It has not been confirmed yet. But he allegedly, or David Grush more than allegedly, has shown that he has provided the Inspector General of the intelligence community with the dates, places, names, and locations. So it's being pursued. There are whistleblowers. It's one of the prevailing ideas of the UFO mythology, and I use the word mythology not in a dismissive way, but in a positive way. The body of stories. One of the recurring stories is any day now. The lid on the government cover-up is going to blow sky high. The problem with that is it's been 8 decades now, and the lid is pretty strong. This might be the definitive case because of the dates, names, and locations that have been provided. In other words, it's empirically testable. There's some way in principle that it could be falsified. At some point, if we're 2 years from now and we are still talking about it, it's the cover up that's going to blow any day, but that day isn't here yet. So I'm open. I don't have any privileged information about the disclosure side of it because I believe the biggest disclosure are the events themselves. The biggest disclosure is the challenge, the collective body of evidence, including the near-death experience. People say, why did you bring in the near-death experience? Because there are parallels. That's part of a larger tapestry of paranormal, larger reality type questions get evoked in both cases. So they're not necessarily separate, discrete phenomena, but part of a larger matrix. And that's what interests me.
Keith, what's next for you? It seems to be you've done, I mean, do you have another book in the works or what?
Well, I don't have another book in the works. Literally, what's next for me is in 2 days from today, the book will be out. I'm having the pleasure of conversations like this. It's interesting. To work on a subject that I actually kept under wraps. I didn't talk when I met new people during the time I was working on this book, down at the dog park. Oh, what do you do, Keith? I'm a writer. What are you working on? And I would always think, is this another conversation I would almost prefer not to have? Because I say, I'm working on a book about the UFO phenomena. Oh, and then I have 20 minutes of their opinions that are based on all kinds of sources, and I go, I'm going to start keeping this to myself.
You're right.
We start doing that too.
Yeah, because
the dog park.
The airplane conversation. You get on an airplane and you sit next to someone you don't. What do you do, Keith? What do you do, Trish? What do you do, Rob? You tell them what you do. You do a podcast. What's your podcast about? What kind of subjects do you deal with?
Yeah.
And if you were hoping to have a quiet flight and have a nap, it's better not to tell them what you do.
That's true.
Better to say something, oh, I'm an accountant. Nobody asks, nobody asks about your spreadsheets. If you tell people accountants, they won't ask you about
or an insurance salesman.
Oh, that's right. I've got all the insurance I need. Thank you. So I'm having the privilege now of going out from having kept this secret, not if you will, in a certain figurative sense. I've kept it secret. Now I'm out talking about it. So I don't know. I'm a writer by profession, and I feel excited about the book I've just done. Be interesting
Great.
to see what kind of response I get. I don't know what's next, but we'll see.
We're looking forward to getting it ourselves. So we haven't.
Yeah, I can't wait.
We usually have the books before and read them before we talk to people, but yours hasn't quite come out yet. So, but the questions that you provided were fantastic. I mean, we do
They're
this.
the best we've gotten.
We do this ourselves when we go on other people's podcasts and provide detailed questions. And yours were great. You know, that really they're open ended and very interesting. So thank you for
And
that.
also, you both brought in topics that I wasn't familiar with about the numbers. How common is the 9?
Uh-huh.
I learn. I'm doing today. I'm doing an interview with you, but I call that field work.
Okay.
Learning more. I'm learning more about what's going on. People say, "What are you going to do next?" I said, "I don't know what's going to be presented to me." I call this phenomenon. I describe it as a call from the cosmos.
Uh-huh.
Right? This is a call from the cosmos, at least metaphorically speaking, to expand our maps, to expand our framework, to open a little more to the periphery, to allow what's there to be in. What other part of life have we found that it's good, that it serves us to keep secrets? For example, you go to a family reunion, you learn about family secrets. Family secrets don't generally serve a healthy function. The more that secrets are aired, whether it's in family or in businesses, in our public life, secrecy generally refers to the desire not to be embarrassed rather than the desire to understand. So the
True.
more we are willing to ask honest questions, it's sometimes old values that we got taught as kids. Tell the truth. That's a pretty good pursue the truth. And my dad used to say, Keith, if you would learn to tell the truth, you wouldn't have to keep so many stories straight in your head. He told me that once because in 2 days I gave him 2 different versions about where I was that night in high school. And he gave me playful, he said, just keep your story straight. Tell the truth and you won't have to worry about what's true. And if there's consequences, it's better to get consequences for the truth rather than to say, okay, what do I tell Dad now? What did I tell him last time?
Right.
No, that's not a good way to live. Takes
The
too much.
government needs to follow that.
Oh boy, does it ever. And amen to that one.
Yeah, right. Okay, thank you very much.
Wait, tell people where they can find your book and
Thank you for asking.
your website.
I'm a big fan of local independent bookstores. So if you've got one in your community, Tuesday morning, get there when they open. The book will be available Tuesday,
Okay.
July 16, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. I have a website, which is www.thompsonatlarge.com. Thompson, all spelled out with a P, atlarge.com. Keith Thompson UFO is a good search term for browser. Thompson UFO it appears to be my identity right now. So I'm not running away from it.
Yeah.
So you can order it from my website and so forth. So
Well, this has been great, Keith. Thank you. We'd love to have you back. I have so many questions to ask you that we can't fit into an hour, and Rob keeps interrupting me. So
and you keep interrupting me.
I know.
I'll let you guys work that out. I sense this. I'll be happy to come in. I'll do it for free. I'll be your counselor.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank you very
much.
much, Keith.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah. Bye now.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.